My name is Emma. I'm 32 now. And most people who meet me think I've always been this way, calm, focused, hard to shake. What they don't see is how that started. It didn't come from confidence. It came from growing up in a house where being quiet made you disappear. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a small, practical house where everything had a place and everything had a purpose. Me dad, David, worked long hours managing a manufacturing plant. My mom, Susan, handled bookkeeping from home and kept the house running like a schedule no one talked about, but everyone followed. We weren't poor, but nothing was wasted. Time, money, attention, it all went where it was considered most useful. There were 2 daughters in that house. My older sister Claire, and me. Claire was 3 years older. And she understood people in a way I never did. She could walk into a room and adjust herself, instantly tone, posture, smile, whatever the moment needed. Adults loved her. Teachers trusted her. At family gatherings, she didn't sit at the kids' table unless she had to. She stayed near the adults, adding comments at just the right time, making people laugh, making them remember her. My parents didn't just notice that, they depended on it. Claire made things easy. She made our family look good. I didn't. I was quiet. But not in a dramatic way. I didn't hide in corners or avoid people. I just didn't feel the need to compete for space. I liked things that didn't require an audience, science, reading, figuring things out on my own. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for much. And over time, that turned into something else. If you don't ask, people assume you don't need. One of the clearest memories I have is from 8th grade. I made it to the state science fair. Not just my school, the entire state. I was the only student from my school who qualified that year. I remember working on that project every night at the kitchen counter, moving papers out of the way so my mom could still cook, cleaning everything up before anyone noticed how long I'd been there. The same weekend as the competition, Claire had a community theater performance. She wasn't the lead. She had a small role. A few lines. My parents didn't hesitate. They went to her performance. I didn't argue. I didn't ask them to come. I told myself it made sense. Claire had a set schedule. My thing was just a presentation. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal, but I remember standing in that auditorium before they announced the winners, scanning the crowd anyway, just in case. Everyone else had someone there. Parents leaning forward in their seats, phones ready. People who knew exactly which kid they came to support. I stood there alone. When they called my name for second place, I felt something shift. Not excitement. Not pride. Just awareness. Like I had proof of something. But no one to hand it to. I brought the ribbon home anyway. My dad looked at it, nodded once, and said, "That's good." Then he turned to Claire and asked how her performance went. That was the whole conversation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. That's what made it stick. There was no moment I could point to and say, "That's when everything went wrong." It was just a pattern, repeating itself in small, quiet ways until it became normal. I started adjusting. I stopped bringing things up unless I had to. I stopped expecting reactions. I learned how to be efficient with my words. Because long explanations didn't change anything. I focused on what I could control: grades, class, the next step, and the step after that. If I couldn't be the daughter they paid attention to, I was going to be the one they couldn't ignore later. High school made the gap more obvious. Claire was everywhere. Student council, events, constantly surrounded by people. My parents knew her schedule better than they knew their own. They showed up to everything she did. Sometimes early. Sometimes staying late. Always engaged. I had a full schedule too. Après classe. Laps. Extra work that followed me home every night. I'd sit at the dinner table with my books open while conversations happened around me that I wasn't part of. Every once in a while, my mom would glance over. "You're doing okay, right?" That was her way of checking in. Not what I was working on. Not how things were going. Just a quick confirmation that I wasn't a problem. Yeah. I'd sigh. And that was enough. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being seen as low maintenance. No one worries about you. No one checks twice. You become background without anyone meaning to put you there. By senior year, I had everything lined up: grades, application, a plan that didn't depend on anyone else. I didn't talk about it much at home. Not because I was hiding it, but because I had already learned how those conversations ended. A note? A short response. Then back to Claire. So when the acceptance letter came, it didn't feel real at first. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The house was quiet, which was rare. Claire was visiting, sitting across from my dad at the kitchen table while he went through paperwork. I opened the envelope standing up. I read the first line once. Then again. "Dad," I said. And even to me, my voice sounded different. "I got into med school." He took the letter, adjusted his glasses, and read it carefully. Slower than I expected. For a second, I thought he might just hand it back, but he didn't. He looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. "That's a real medical school," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. But it was something I had been waiting for longer than I wanted to admit. Then he added, "Maybe you'll actually make something of yourself." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time, I felt like I had stepped out of the background. That night, my mom called a few relatives. She told them I got into med school. I could hear it in her voice, something close to pride. Directed at me. At dinner, I looked over at Claire. She was smiling. If you didn't know her, you'd think it was genuine, but I had spent my whole life watching her, and I knew the difference. Her smile stopped at her mouth. Her eyes were already working through something else. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. That maybe this was a turning point. Maybe things were finally shifting. Maybe I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't realize I had just stepped into a spotlight someone else wasn't willing to share. I was still standing in the kitchen, holding that acceptance letter, when everything in the room shifted just enough for me to feel it. It wasn't loud. No one jumped up. No one hugged me. But for the first time in my life, the attention in that house moved in my direction and stayed there longer than a few seconds. My dad didn't hand the letter back right away. He read it again. Slower this time. Like he was making sure he hadn't missed something. "Oregon Health and Science," he said, almost under his breath. "That's not easy to get into?" That was the closest thing to approval I had ever heard from him. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. It's one of the programs I applied to." One of the programs. Like it wasn't the one I had been working toward for years. Like I hadn't built my entire life around that moment. He looked up at me again. "What's your plan?" It was a simple question, but it meant something. He was asking like it mattered. "I start in the fall. I'll need to move out there by August." I said, "I've already been looking at housing near campus." He gave a short nod. "Good. You should go somewhere serious if you're going to do this." If you're going to do this, I didn't take it personally. That was just how he talked. Direct. No extra words. But I held on to the part that mattered. He believed this was real. My mom reacted differently. Within an hour, she had her phone in her hand, calling people. Not everyone, just the ones whose opinions mattered to her. "I'm telling you." She got into medical school, she said, pacing the kitchen. "No. Not local. Oregon." "Yes. That one." Her voice had a kind of energy I had never heard when she talked about me before. It wasn't just information. It was pride. At one point, she looked over at me while she was still on the call and smiled like she was seeing me for the first time. I didn't know what to do with that. At dinner, things felt different. Subtle, but different. My dad asked me what kind of classes I'd be taking. My mom asked about the city, about how far it was, about whether I knew anyone there. They weren't deep questions, but they were questions, and they were directed at me. For years, I had sat at that same table while conversations moved around me. That night, I was part of it. I answered everything carefully, like I didn't want to mess it up. I'll be doing mostly foundational courses the first year, I said. Anatomy, physiology, lab work. My dad nodded again. That's a lot of work. I know. He gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Not doubt. Not exactly. More like evaluation. Well, he said, we'll see how you handle it. That was his version of encouragement. I accepted it. Across the table, Claire was quiet. Not silent, she responded when someone spoke to her. But she wasn't driving the conversation the way she usually did. She wasn't filling the space. She wasn't redirecting attention back to herself. She was watching. At one point, my mom turned to her and said, "Did you know about this?" Claire smiled. Quick and controlled. She mentioned she was applying. Mentioned. I hadn't just mentioned it. I had told her everything. Every school. Every deadline. Every concern I had about getting in. But I didn't correct her. There was no point. That's impressive, she added, still smiling. Med school isn't easy to get into. It sounded right. It sounded supportive. But something in the way she said it felt measured, like she was acknowledging it without giving it weight. I caught her eyes for a second. She held the smile. But her expression didn't change behind it. Then she looked away. That should have been enough to tell me something was off. It wasn't. I wanted to believe things were changing. Over the next few days, my parents kept bringing it up in small ways. My dad asked about tuition. My mom started talking about what I needed to pack. She even asked if I had enough clothes for the weather out there. They were details. Practical things. But they were still attention. And after years of getting almost none, even small amounts felt significant. Claire, on the other hand, I started doing something new. She started calling me. At first, it didn't seem strange. We had never been especially close. But we weren't distant either. We just existed in the same space without overlapping much. Now, suddenly, she wanted to know everything. "How's the housing search going?" she asked one evening. "I found a couple of places near campus." I said, "I'm still comparing prices." "That's smart. You don't want to overpay your first year." She sounded helpful, supportive. Even. A couple of days later, she called again. "What's your schedule going to look like?" "I don't have the full breakdown yet," I said. "Just the general structure." "Who's your advisor?" she asked. "I don't know yet. They assign that closer to the start date." She paused for a second, like she was filing that away. "Got it." She kept asking questions like that. Specific ones. Details I hadn't expected her to care about. At the time, I thought it meant something good. I thought maybe she was finally interested in my life. Maybe she saw me differently now. Maybe getting into med school had changed the way she saw me. I answered everything. Every name. Every plan. Every uncertainty. I didn't hold anything back. Looking back now, I understand what was happening. She wasn't connecting. She was collecting. But in that moment, standing on the edge of something I had worked years for, I didn't question it. I finally had what I had been chasing my entire life. Recognition. From my parents. From the people who had always overlooked me. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't competing for space at that table. I thought I had earned my place. I didn't realize I had just taken something someone else wasn't willing to lose. I was halfway through my 3rd year when everything I had built started to crack. And it didn't come from school. It came from one phone call I shouldn't have made. Her name was Maya. She wasn't just my roommate. She was the reason I made it through the 1st year without burning out. She had grown up in foster care. No real safety net. No one checking in on her. And somehow she was still the most steady person I knew. When things got hard, she didn't panic. She focused. So when she got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, it didn't feel real at first. Not because I didn't understand what that meant, I did. I just couldn't process how fast everything changed. One week we were studying together. The next, I was sitting in a hospital room at 3 in the morning, watching her try to breathe through pain that no medication seemed to touch. She didn't have family to step in. No one to take shifts. No one to handle the logistics. So I did. The next morning, I went straight to the dean's office. I explained everything. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid out the facts. My friend was terminal. She had no one. I needed time. They approved a formal leave of absence that same day. 1 semester. Caregiver status. Everything documented. Everything official. My spot in the program was secured for when I came back. It was handled the right way. I moved into Maya's apartment that week. I drove her to chemo appointments. Managed her medications. Sat with her through nights that blurred into mornings. I learned things no one teaches you: how to read lab results. How to recognize when pain is getting worse. How to stay calm when everything around you isn't. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a decision. At some point, I called Claire. I don't know why. Maybe I still believed that if I explained things clearly enough, she would understand. Maybe I thought this was the kind of situation that made people drop whatever they were holding on to and just be human. I told her everything. About Maya. About the diagnosis. About the leave of absence. About the plan to go back in the spring. She listened the whole time. Oh my God. Emma, she said. Her voice soft. Steady. I'm so sorry. That's a lot. Yeah. I said, it's temporary. I'll be back next semester. Of course you will. She replied. You're doing the right thing. There was a pause. Do Mom and Dad know? She asked. No. I said, I haven't told them yet. I didn't want them to worry. It's already complicated. Yeah? She said quickly. That makes sense. Let them focus on their own stuff. I won't say anything. I remember feeling relieved, like she was finally on my side. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my dad. I stepped out into the hallway to take the call. The hospital lights were too bright, and everything smelled like disinfectant. Emma, he said. His voice was flat, controlled. Hey, Dad, I said. What's going on? Your sister told us everything. Something in my chest tightened. What do you mean? The dropping out, he said. The boyfriend. The situation you've been hiding? I leaned back against the wall. Dad, that's not. She showed us the messages. He cut in. We saw it ourselves. My mind went blank for a second. What messages? I asked. Dad, I'm literally in a hospital right now. I'm taking care of my friend. She's sick. Claire said you'd say that. There was a pause. She said you'd have a story ready. I stared at the floor. No. I said, more firmly this time. This isn't a story. I took a leave of absence. It's approved. I can send you the paperwork. I can give you the dean's number. My mom's voice came on the line. How could you lie to us for this long? She said. Her voice was shaking. I'm not lying. I said, Mom, please, just listen to me. I can prove everything. I have documents. Enough. My dad said. Just one word. Clear. Final. Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth. The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, still holding my phone. 4 minutes. That's how long it took. 4 minutes for them to decide who I was. I went back into the room. Maya was asleep. Her breathing uneven. Machines doing most of the work her body couldn't keep up with anymore. I sat down in the chair next to her bed and stared at the wall. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. I'm sorry, Emma. I couldn't keep your secret anymore. I read it twice. There was no confusion. No misunderstanding. She hadn't misheard me. She had rewritten everything. And she had done it clean. She knew exactly what to say. Exactly what my parents would believe. She didn't just lie. She supported it. Message. Proof. Enough to make them feel certain. Enough to make them not question anything I said. I tried anyway. Over the next 5 days, I called 14 times. The first few went to voicemail. Then my dad blocked my number. 2 days later, my mom did the same. I sent emails. One short, one long. With attachments, official documents, signature, contact information for the school. No response. I wrote a letter, handwritten, mailed it directly. It came back unopened. I recognized my mom's handwriting on the envelope. That part didn't hurt the most. The silence did. Every attempt I made was ignored before it even had a chance to be heard. And the worst part was, it wasn't new. This wasn't a sudden change. This was the same pattern I had lived with my entire life. Just louder, Claire spoke. They believed her. I explained. They didn't listen. 5 days. That's all it took for me to understand something I had been avoiding for years. They didn't choose her over me in that moment. They had already chosen. Claire just gave them a reason they could accept. I sat there with my phone still in my hand, staring at the last message Claire sent like it might change if I looked at it long enough. It didn't. I tried calling again, straight to voicemail. I waited a minute, then called my mom. It rang once, then stopped. Blocked. I didn't panic right away. I told myself it was temporary, that they were upset, confused, reacting too quickly, that once things settled down, they'd listen. So I kept trying. The next morning, I called again. And again. And again. No answer. By the third call, I knew my dad had blocked me. It didn't ring long enough to even pretend otherwise. It just cut off. I switched to my mom's number. Same thing by the end of the second day. Blocked. I stood in the hospital hallway, staring at my phone like it was malfunctioning. It wasn't. I went back into Maya's room and sat down. The machines were steady. The room was quiet, except for the monitor and the occasional movement from the IV line. Everything in that room made sense. Vitals, medication schedules, lab results. There was logic to all of it. What was happening outside that room didn't. I opened my laptop that night and wrote an email. Short. Direct. I explained the leave of absence. Attached the official paperwork. Included the dean's contact information. I made it as easy as possible for them to verify everything. I hit send and waited. Nothing. The next morning, I wrote another one. Longer this time. I explained Maya's condition. I explained why I made the decision. I laid everything out step by step. Like I was presenting a case, I attached everything again. I even added the oncologist's name and the hospital contact, if they wanted proof. It was all there. I hit send. Nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. Not even a single question. Just silence. I told myself maybe they hadn't seen it yet. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they needed time. So I waited another day. Still nothing. That's when I wrote the letter. Handwritten. Slower than typing. More deliberate. I figured maybe if they saw my handwriting, it would make it real. In a way, emails didn't. I kept it simple. I told them where I was, what I was doing, that I hadn't dropped out, that I was coming back in the spring. I asked them to call me. Just once. I mailed it priority. 5 days later, it came back, unopened. The envelope had been turned around and sent back exactly the way it arrived. My mom's handwriting was on the front. I recognized it immediately. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, standing in the kitchen of Maya's apartment, trying to process what that meant. They didn't read it. They didn't even try. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. They had decided not to. I sat down at the table and finally opened the envelope, even though I already knew what was inside. My letter was exactly where I left it. Folded, untouched, like it had never been worth reading. I tried one more thing. I called Linda, my aunt, my dad's younger sister, the only person in the family who had ever treated me like I wasn't second place by default. She picked up on the second ring. "Emma, is everything okay?" I didn't waste time. "No," I said. "Can you talk to Dad?" There was a pause. "What happened?" I explained everything. The leave of absence, Maya, the phone call, the emails, the letter. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "I'll call him." 40 minutes later, she called me back. I knew from her voice before she even said anything. "He told me to stay out of it," she said quietly. I closed my eyes. "I tried to explain," she continued. "I told him about the leave. About your program? He didn't want to hear it." "What did he say?" I asked. Another pause. "He said you made your choice." That was it. That was the line. Not confusion. Not anger. Not even disappointment. A decision. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and felt something inside me shift in a way I couldn't undo. For 5 days, I had been trying to fix something. Now, I understood there was nothing to fix. Every call I made, every email I sent, every piece of proof I offered, it all assumed one thing: that they wanted to hear me. They didn't. Claire had given them a version of me that made sense to them. A version that fit the pattern they had always followed. She spoke. They believed her. I explained. They didn't listen. It wasn't new. It just wasn't subtle anymore. Every science fair they skipped. Every time they asked Claire about her day before they even looked at me. Every moment I told myself didn't matter. It all added up to this. This wasn't a sudden break. This was the final version of something that had been happening for years. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I ran out of ways to reach them. Because I finally understood I wasn't being ignored. I was being shut out. There's a difference. Ignoring means there's still a chance someone might respond. Shutting someone out means the decision is already made. I put my phone down on the table and didn't pick it up again. Not to call them. Not to check if they changed their minds. Not to see if maybe, somehow, they reached out. They didn't. And for the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for them to. That was the moment it became real. I didn't just lose an argument. I lost my place in that family. Not gradually. Not emotionally. Practically. No calls. No messages. No contact. No way back. I was still sitting in that same chair next to Maya's bed every night. I still had responsibilities. I still had things I needed to do. But something had changed in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't someone they misunderstood. I was someone they had decided not to have. And once I saw it that clearly, there was no way to go back to pretending I still had a family waiting for me on the other end of a phone call. I stopped checking my phone after that. And for the first time in days, everything around me got very quiet. Not peaceful. Just quiet in a way that made it easier to hear what actually mattered. Maya. Her condition got worse fast. The doctors had warned me it would. But hearing it and watching it are two completely different things. There's a point where treatment stops being about fixing anything and turns into managing what's left. We hit that point sometime in late November. She didn't say it out loud. But I could tell she knew. The questions stopped. The planning stopped. She wasn't talking about after this anymore. She was just trying to get through each hour. I stayed with her as much as I could. I learned how to read the small changes, how her breathing shifted when the pain spiked, how her hands would tense before she said anything. I didn't need her to explain it. I could see it. One night, around 3 in the morning, she woke up suddenly, gasping for air. I was asleep in the chair next to her bed, and I remember the sound snapping me awake before I even understood what was happening. "I'm here?" I said. Already on my feet, she grabbed my hand. Hard. "It's okay," I told her, even though I knew it wasn't. "Just breathe. Stay with me." The nurse came in, adjusted her medication, checked her vitals. Things stabilized after a few minutes. But Maya didn't let go of my hand right away. "Emma," she said, her voice rough. "Barely there." "Yeah. Don't stop." I leaned closer. "Don't stop what?" She took a breath. Slow. Controlled. "Don't stop your life because of me." I shook my head. "I'm not." "Yes. You are," she said. Not harsh. Just certain. "And I get it. But you can't stay here forever." I didn't argue. There wasn't anything to argue with. "I'll go back," I said. "In January." I already set it up. She studied my face like she was checking if I meant it. "Good," she said. "Because you're going to be a great doctor. And I don't want to be the reason you don't get there." "You're not," I said. She gave a small smile. "Then prove it." That was the last real conversation we had. After that, things got quieter. She slept more. Talked less. The moments where she was fully present got shorter. Farther apart. I stayed anyway. I sat there through all of it. Because there was nothing else to do that mattered more. She passed on a Sunday morning. It was early. The light coming through the window was soft. Almost gray. There were no alarms. No sudden movement. Just the monitor slowing down. Then stopping. I was the only one in the room. I remember looking at the screen. Waiting for it to change. Like maybe it would correct itself if I gave it a second. It didn't. A nurse came in quietly. She checked everything. Confirmed what I already knew. And then left me alone with her for a few minutes. I sat there, still holding her hand. There wasn't anything dramatic about it. No breakdown. No sudden rush of emotion. I had been losing her for months. This was just the moment it became official. The funeral was small. 6 people. One of her former foster siblings drove up. 2 classmates came. A nurse from the oncology ward showed up on her day off. That was it. The room could have held 60. Most of the seats were empty. I stood at the front and read the eulogy. I kept it simple. Facts. Who she was. What she did. The way she handled things when everything was falling apart. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't grieving. Because I didn't have anything left to break. After it was over, people came up to me, said the usual things, then left one by one, until it was just me and the staff closing up. I went back to her apartment that night. Our apartment, everything was still there. Her jacket by the door. Her coffee mug in the sink. The blanket she always kept on the couch. I stood in the middle of the room for a while. Not moving. Just taking it in. Then I sat down and opened my laptop. The re-enrollment form was still saved where I left it. All I had to do was fill it out and submit it. It should have been simple. But I just stared at it. Because now there was nothing holding me there anymore. No reason to stay. No one to take care of. And for a second, I thought about not going back. Just stopping. Finding something easier. Something that didn't require this much from me all the time. I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again. And that's when I saw it. A book on the table, Maya's copy of Grey's Anatomy. We used to joke about it because of the name. It was sitting where she left it. Slightly open. Like she had been reading it recently. I picked it up. There was a sticky note inside. Yellow. Folded over the edge of the page. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Her handwriting was messy. Like she didn't have the energy to make it neat. Finish what you started. Emma. Become the doctor. I know you are. And don't let anyone, especially your own blood, Tell you who you are. I read it twice. Then a third time. She hadn't written that for herself. She wrote it for me. She knew. She knew exactly where I would be after she was gone. Sitting in that apartment, trying to figure out what came next. I put the note down carefully and looked back at the laptop. The form was still open. 2 options. Submit or don't. For the first time since everything happened, the choice felt clear. Not easy. Just clear. I filled it out. Every section. Every confirmation. No hesitation. Then I hit submit. The screen refreshed. And a confirmation message popped up. That was it. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a decision. I sat there for a while after that. The apartment quiet around me. Her note still on the table. Everything still hurt. None of that had changed. But something else had. For weeks, I had been reacting to my parents. To Claire. To everything that had been taken away from me. This was the first thing I chose for myself. Not because I had something to prove. Not because I wanted to fix anything. Because it was mine. Maya didn't leave me much. No money. No family connections. Nothing you could point to and call an inheritance. But she left me that note. And somehow, that was enough to get me moving again. Not back to where I was. Forward. On my terms. I packed my bags 2 days after I submitted the re-enrollment form. And this time, there was no one to update. No one to convince. And no one to wait for. I got on a flight with 1 suitcase. A backpack. And a checking account that had just under $50 in it. I knew the number because I checked it 3 times before boarding. Like it might change if I looked again. It didn't. When I landed, everything felt the same as before. On the surface, the campus, the buildings. The same cold air that hit you, the second you stepped outside. But it wasn't the same anymore. The difference was simple. I was on my own. Not in the way people say when they mean independence. I meant completely. No fallback. No calls home. No one to cover anything if I miscalculated. If something went wrong, it was on me, so I didn't let things go wrong. I went straight to financial aid the first morning back. I sat across from a woman who had probably had this same conversation 100 times and explained my situation without adding anything extra. I took a leave of absence for medical reasons. I said, I'm back now. I need to figure out how to cover tuition and living expenses. She nodded, typed for a few seconds, then looked up. You're eligible for additional loans, she said. It won't be comfortable, but it'll be enough to get you through. That was all I needed. Not comfortable was fine. Enough was enough. I signed everything they put in front of me. After that, I went to the department office and asked about part-time work. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't have a choice. They had a research assistant position open in one of the labs. Long hours. Low pay. Mostly data collection and prep work no one else wanted to do. I took it immediately. My schedule filled up fast. Classes during the day. Lab work in the evenings. Studying at night. Sleep when I could get it. There wasn't a lot of room for anything else. And that turned out to be exactly what I needed. Because when you don't have time to think, you don't have time to fall apart. There were moments, though, small ones, like standing in line at the cafeteria, doing the math in my head before deciding what I could afford, or sitting in my apartment, looking at a bill and figuring out how to delay it without it becoming a bigger problem later. I ate a lot of leftover food from the hospital cafeteria. Not because I liked it, because it was there. And no one was counting it closely enough to stop me. I stopped buying anything that wasn't necessary. I stopped expecting anything to get easier. And eventually, something shifted. At first, I thought I was just getting used to it. But it wasn't that. I was getting stronger. Not emotionally in a dramatic way. There were no big speeches. No sudden clarity about everything that had happened. It was quieter than that. I stopped replaying the phone call in my head. I stopped thinking about whether my parents would ever reach out. I stopped wondering what Claire was telling people about me. None of it mattered in my day-to-day anymore, because none of it changed what I had to do next. Medical school doesn't slow down for your personal life. Exams don't get easier because you're dealing with something. Rotations don't adjust because you didn't sleep. If you fall behind, you stay behind. So I didn't. I showed up to everything. Early when I could be. On time when I couldn't. Prepared. Focused. There's a point where effort stops being optional and becomes automatic. That's where I lived. One night, during a clinical rotation, I ended up in a supply room at around 2 in the morning. It was quiet. Just the hum of the lights and the faint noise of activity down the hall. I leaned back against the shelf for a second. Just to breathe. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I needed a pause. A resident walked in. Grabbed what he needed. Then stopped when he saw me. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded. Like that was enough. And left. That was the difference. No one expected an explanation. No one needed one. I stayed there for maybe 30 seconds. Then went back out and kept working. That became my routine. Feel it. If it came up, then move. Keep going. I didn't need motivation anymore. I had structure. And structure is more reliable. Time passed faster than I expected. Not because it was easy. Because I was too busy to track it. Weeks turned into months. Months into semesters. I passed everything. Not at the top of the class. Not with perfect scores. But consistently. Solid. Reliable. The kind of performance that builds trust over time. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was just doing the work. And the work started to pay off. When graduation came, it felt quiet. Not empty. Just contained. I stood there in my cap and gown, holding my diploma, and looked out at the crowd. Families. Cameras. People cheering. I didn't look for anyone, because I already knew. They weren't there, and for the first time, that didn't hit me the way it would have before. It didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had been removed a long time ago. And I had already adjusted to the space it left. After the ceremony, people took photos with their families. Hugged. Celebrated. I stepped off to the side. And then I saw Linda. She walked up with a smile that didn't try too hard. "I told you you'd get here," she said. I nodded. "Yeah. You did." She handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Something for later," she said. "You'll know when to open it." I didn't ask questions. I took it and put it in my bag. We stood there for a minute, watching everything around us. "You did this on your own," she said. I shook my head slightly. "Not completely," I said, because I knew that wasn't true. Maya had been part of it. Even if she wasn't there, even if no one else knew, that note was still in my apartment, still exactly where I left it, and everything I had done since then traced back to that moment. That decision. To keep going. Not because it was expected. Not because anyone was watching. Because I chose to. And that made all the difference. I signed my residency contract without telling anyone. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something I was hiding. It just felt like my life moving forward. I matched into a surgical residency at one of the busiest trauma centers on the East Coast. It wasn't the kind of place people ended up by accident. You had to earn it. And once you were in, you had to keep earning it every single day. The hours were long. The expectations were higher. And no one cared where you came from or what you had gone through to get there. That was exactly what I needed. There was no room for distractions. No room for history. No room for anything except the work in front of you. My first year felt like being dropped into deep water and told to swim without asking how. 12-hour shifts turned into 16. Nights blurred into mornings. You learned fast, or you got left behind. I learned fast, not because I was naturally better than anyone else, but because I didn't have anything to fall back on. This wasn't just a step forward for me. It was everything. I showed up early. I stayed late. I paid attention to details other people skipped because they were tired. I didn't complain. There's a difference between working hard and working, like failure isn't an option. I was doing the second. That kind of effort doesn't go unnoticed forever. By my second year, attendings started trusting me with more responsibility. Not the easy cases. The complicated ones. The ones where you had to think before you moved. By my third year, I wasn't just keeping up, I was leading. That's around the time I met Dr. Harris. She had been in surgery longer than most of the staff combined. Not loud. Not overly friendly. But when she walked into a room, people paid attention. The first time she observed one of my cases, she didn't say much. Just stood there. Watching. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "You don't hesitate," she said. "I try not to." I replied, "That's not what I mean." She said, "You decide, and then you move. That's rare." I didn't know what to say to that. She nodded once. "Keep it that way. Don't let anyone slow you down." That was her version of approval. And it mattered. She became the closest thing I had to a mentor. Not in a personal way. We didn't sit down and talk about life. But she showed me what consistency looked like at the highest level. No excuses. No wasted movement. No unnecessary emotion in critical moments. I learned more from watching her than I ever did from lectures. Around that same time, I met Ethan. He wasn't part of the hospital. He worked as a civil rights attorney, doing pro bono work, with a clinic that partnered with our department. The first time we spoke, it wasn't anything significant. He asked me a question about a patient case. I gave him a direct answer. That should have been the end of it, but a few days later, we ran into each other again. Then again after that, eventually. He asked if I wanted to get coffee. I almost said no, not because I wasn't interested, because I wasn't used to making space for things outside of work. But I said yes. We sat in a small place a few blocks from the hospital. Nothing complicated. Just coffee and a table by the window. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He didn't try to impress me. He just listened. At some point, I told him the truth. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. Just pieces. My family. The phone call. The silence after. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he took a second before responding. "You deserve better," he said. 4 words. No analysis. No advice. No attempt to fix anything. Just a statement. And for some reason, that landed harder than anything anyone had said to me before. We kept seeing each other after that. It wasn't complicated. No games. No guessing. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when I spoke. He didn't make me explain myself more than once. That kind of consistency stands out when you've spent most of your life adjusting to inconsistency. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony. About 30 people. No big venue. No extended guest list. Dr. Harris was there. Linda was there. Ethan's father walked me down the aisle. I sent an invitation to my parents. It came back unopened. I didn't react. Not because it didn't matter. Because I already knew what to expect. That day wasn't about what I didn't have. It was about what I had built. And that was enough. Life after that settled into something steady. Not easy, but stable. I finished residency. Stayed on at the hospital. Took on more responsibility. More cases. More leadership, eventually. I was offered a position I hadn't even been aiming for yet. Chief of Trauma Surgery. I didn't celebrate when they told me. I just nodded and said, "Okay." Because by then, success didn't feel like a moment. It felt like a continuation of what I had been doing all along. Work. Consistency. Decisions made without hesitation. Ethan and I bought a house outside the city. Nothing extravagant. Just a place with enough space. A quiet street. And a front porch that got good light in the mornings. We got a dog. A golden retriever that followed me from room to room, like it had decided I was its job. Life wasn't dramatic. It was structured. Predictable in the ways that mattered. I knew where I was going every day. I knew who I was going home to. I knew what I had built. And more importantly, I knew I built it without relying on anyone who had chosen not to be there. There's a kind of distance that forms when you go through something like that. Not anger. Not resentment. Just separation. My family existed somewhere in the background of my life. Not part of it. Not influencing it. Just there. I didn't check in. I didn't ask about them. Linda would call occasionally. Update me on things I didn't request, but didn't avoid either. My parents were fine. Claire had gotten divorced. She was working in medical sales now. That detail didn't surprise me. But it didn't matter. None of it did. Because by then, my life had moved far enough forward that the past didn't control it anymore. It existed, but it didn't define anything I was doing now. I wasn't waiting for anything to change. I wasn't hoping for anything to come back. I had already built something new, something that didn't depend on being seen by the people who had spent years looking past me. And that created a gap that couldn't be closed just by time passing. 5 years had gone by. Not slowly, not dramatically, just steadily. And in that time, I became someone they wouldn't recognize. Not because I changed who I was, because I finally stopped trying to be someone they would notice. I was halfway through my night shift when the pager went off. And I didn't think twice before grabbing it. Level 1 trauma. Motor vehicle collision. Female. Mid-30s. Unstable vitals. ETA 8 minutes. That's the kind of call that clears your head instantly. No room for distraction. No space for anything, except what needs to happen next. I was already moving. Scrubs on. Hair tied back. Badge clipped where it always sits. I ran through the case in my head while walking toward the trauma bay blunt force. Possible internal bleeding. High chance of splenic rupture. Maybe liver involvement. Standard. Routine. Manageable. The team was already assembling when I got there. 2 residents. A trauma nurse. Anesthesia on standby. Everyone knew their role. I picked up the intake tablet from the counter and swiped to the incoming patient profile. Name. Claire. I stopped walking. For a second, everything around me kept moving. But I didn't. Date of birth matched. Emergency contact. David. My father. The noise in the room pulled back like someone had turned the volume down. 5 years. 5 years without hearing their voices. Without seeing their faces. Without even letting myself wonder what would happen if we crossed paths again. And now she was coming through those doors. I set the tablet down. Doctor. Emma? One of the nurses said. You good? I blinked once. I'm fine. I said. Prep Bay 2. Call Patel. I want backup in the room. Everything snapped back into place. Because whatever this was, it didn't change what needed to be done. The ambulance doors burst open seconds later. They brought her in fast. Claire was strapped to the stretcher. Oxygen mask in place. Blood soaked through her shirt. One arm hanging loose off the side. IV lines already running. The paramedics were talking over each other. BP dropping, possible abdominal bleed, unresponsive at the scene. I didn't look at her face. Not yet. On my count? I said, 1. Through. 3. We transferred her to the table. Vitals unstable. Heart rate climbing. Blood pressure falling. Internal bleeding. Faust? Get me imaging, no. Skip it. I corrected immediately. We don't have time. Prep for surgery. I moved closer. That's when I saw her. Not clearly. Not like I remembered. But enough. The shape of her face. The line of her jaw. Familiar in a way that didn't feel like memory. It felt like something physical. I didn't react. I couldn't. Let's go, I said. Now. As they rushed her toward the oar, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. 2 people pushing past the hallway doors. My parents. My mom looked smaller. Thinner. Her hair pulled back like she didn't have time to think about it. My dad looked the same, and completely different at the same time. He grabbed a nurse's arm. That's my daughter, he said. I need to speak to whoever's in charge. The nurse tried to guide him back. Sir. You need to wait. I'm not waiting, he said. Get me the doctor. She glanced toward me. just for a second, then back at him. The chief is already handling the case, she said. You'll be updated as soon as possible. He followed her line of sight, toward me. I turned away before he could see my face clearly. Not now. There wasn't time for that. I stepped into the scrub room and turned on the water. Hot. Immediate. I looked at my reflection in the stainless steel panel above the sink. Ça me fate. Some expression. But everything underneath it had shifted. 5 years ago. I was the one trying to explain myself. 5 years ago. I was the one asking to be heard. Now I was the one in control of whether their daughter lived or died. I didn't let that thought stay. Because it didn't belong there. I scrubbed in. Called Patel. I have a conflict of interest. I said. Patient is family. I'm documenting it. If I'm compromised, you take over. Understood. He replied. Everything by the book. Everything clean. I pushed through the ore doors. Claire was already prepped. Monitors, steady, but fragile. The room was quiet in that focused way that only happens when everyone knows what's at stake. For a moment, she wasn't my sister. She was a patient, and that's exactly how I needed it. Scalpel, I said. The surgery took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Ruptured spleen. We removed it. Lever laceration. Repaired. Multiple bleeding points. Controlled. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just movement. Precision. Decisions made exactly when they needed to be made. I didn't speak unless I had to. The residents watched closely. They always do. But this time, the room felt tighter. More focused. Atchase. Patruzet shiopta. I placed the final stitch. Vitals stabilized. She was alive. Patel stepped closer, pulling his mask down slightly. That was clean, he said. You want me to talk to the family? I removed my gloves, dropped them in the bin, and washed my hands. Automatics. No? I said. I'll do it. I looked at my reflection again. No change on the surface, but something had settled. 5 years ago, I was the daughter they erased. Now I was the surgeon who just saved the one person they chose over me. Those two realities were about to collide. I walked down the hallway toward the waiting room. Each step felt measured. Controlled. Not heavy. Not emotional. Just deliberata. When I pushed through the doors, they were sitting in the front row, exactly where I expected them to be. My dad stood up immediately. Doctor, he said. Is she? Then he stopped. His eyes dropped to my badge, then back to my face, then back to the badge again. Recognition moved through him slowly, like his brain was trying to reject it before accepting it. My mom followed his gaze. Her hand went to his arm, tight. Emma, she said. Barely audible. 5 seconds. That's how long we stood there. 5 years sitting in the space between us. I spoke first. Calm. Clinical. The same voice I use for every family in that room. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. I said. Your daughter sustained a ruptured spleen and a liver laceration. Surgery was successful. She's stable and in the ICU. You'll be able to see her shortly. I didn't say Mom. I didn't say Dad. I watched that land. My mom took a step forward, arms lifting like she was about to hug me. Emma? I stepped back, just half a step. Enough. She froze. Her hands stayed in the air for a second, then slowly dropped. My dad's voice came out rough. You're a doctor? I am. You're the chief? Yes. He shook his head slightly, like he was trying to reset something that wasn't responding. But Claire said, What did she say? I asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't need to. I already knew, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to explain it. I held their gaze for a second longer, then turned and walked out before either of them could try to fill the silence. I didn't need to hear their version of anything anymore. By the time I got back to the ICU a few hours later, the floor already felt different. Hospitals have a way of carrying tension without saying anything out loud. You can feel it in how people move, How they lower their voices. How they avoid eye contact just a little too carefully. Claire was awake. Barely. Her eyes were open. Unfocused at first. Then slowly tracking the room like she was trying to piece together where she was. I stepped inside. "Good morning," I said. She turned her head slightly. Then she saw me. Really saw me. Her eyes locked onto my badge first. Like they needed confirmation before her brain could process anything else. Then back to my face. "Emma?" she said. Her voice was weak. Dry. "I'm your attending surgeon," I said. "You had internal bleeding. We operated. You're stable." She stared at me like I had just said something impossible. "You're here?" "I work here," I said. "I've been here for a while." There was a long pause. Her breathing picked up slightly. "You're a doctor," she said. More to herself than to me. "I am." Another pause. "And you?" She swallowed. "You did the surgery?" "Yes." That landed. Not emotionally. Physically. I watched it happen. The realization moved through her face in stages: confusion. Disbelief. Then something sharper. Recognition. Not just of who I was. Of what that meant. For the first time since I had walked into that room, Claire didn't look like she had control over the situation. She looked like she was trying to catch up to it. "I can explain," she said. I didn't respond. I adjusted the IV line. Checked her vitals. Kept my movements steady. "You don't need to explain anything to me," I said. "You need to explain it to them." I nodded toward the glass door. My parents were standing just outside, watching. Claire followed my line of sight. Her expression changed again. Not fear. Calculation. That part hadn't gone away. I finished the check. Updated her chart. And left. I didn't stay for the conversation that followed. I didn't need to. The walls in that ICU weren't soundproof. Everyone heard it. My mom's voice came first. Not controlled. Not careful. "What did you tell us?" Silence. Then Claire. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" My dad cut in. "From the truth? She wasn't telling you everything. She was a surgeon," my dad said. "She's been a surgeon for years." Another pause. "You said she dropped out?" "I thought she did," Claire said quickly. "You showed us messages," he said. "You said you had proof." You told us she was lying," my mom said. "You told us she was hiding things? You told us not to believe her." The room went quiet again. Then my dad spoke. Slower this time. "She called us 14 times. I felt that, even from outside the room. She sent emails," he continued. "She sent letters." My mom's voice dropped. "We sent them back." That was the moment it broke. Not when they realized I was a doctor. Not when they saw me standing there in front of them. When they heard themselves say what they had done. Out loud. There's something different about knowing you made a mistake, and hearing it spoken back to you in a way you can't avoid. Claire tried again. "I didn't think it would go this far. It went exactly where you pushed it," my dad said. No anger. Just clarity. That was new. "I was trying to keep things stable," she said. "You erased her?" My mom said. That word stayed in the air. No one argued with it, because no one could. A few minutes later, the door opened. Linda walked in. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. She stepped into that room like she had been waiting for this moment for years. "I think we're done guessing," she said. She pulled out her phone. "I kept everything," she added. That got their attention. "All the emails Emma sent," she said. Scrolling. The attachments. The official leave of absence. The confirmation from her program. Dates. Times. Everything. She handed the phone to my mom. My mom's hands shook as she took it. "And this?" Linda said, pulling up another screen. "Is from Claire?" She read it out loud. "Don't tell Mom and Dad about Emma's residency. It'll just confuse them. They're finally at peace." No one spoke. My dad didn't move. My mom didn't look up from the screen. Claire didn't say a word. Because there was nothing left to say. The structure she had built over 5 years didn't collapse slowly. It dropped all at once. Every version of the story she had told, every detail she had adjusted, every lie she had reinforced. Gone. And there was nothing to replace it with. No backup explanation. No new angle. Just silence. My mom sat down. Not carefully. Just down. Like her body stopped holding itself up. My dad turned away from the bed and walked to the window. He stood there, looking out, not saying anything. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a response. Claire stayed in the bed, staring straight ahead. No performance. No tears. Just still. When people lose control of a narrative they've been managing for years, they don't always react dramatically. Sometimes they just stop, because they don't know what version of themselves is left without it. I didn't go back into the room. I stayed in the hallway, not avoiding it, just not needing to be inside it. 5 years of trying to explain myself had led to nothing. This didn't require me at all. The truth didn't need help. It didn't need emotion. It didn't need effort. It just needed to exist long enough in front of the right people. And once it did, everything else followed. I watched through the glass as my parents sat there, not arguing, not asking questions, just processing. And for the first time, I wasn't part of that equation. I wasn't trying to be heard. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't even trying to be understood. I had already moved past that. This wasn't about me getting anything back. It was about them finally seeing what had been there the entire time, and realizing what it cost them to ignore it. I gave them a few hours before I went back in. Not because I needed the time, but because they did. When I stepped into the room again, everything felt quieter. Not tense. Just settled in a way that happens after something breaks and there's nothing left to hold it together. My mom stood up as soon as she saw me. "Emma," she started, her voice already shaking. "I'm so sorry." I raised my hand slightly, not to shut her down, to slow it down. "I hear you," I said, "and I believe you're sorry." That stopped her for a second. "But sorry doesn't fix anything," I added. "It's just where you start." She nodded quickly, like she was trying to hold on to that. My dad didn't move right away. He was still by the window. But he turned when I spoke. "We made a mistake," he said. "It was simple, direct, and late." "Yes," I said. "No softening it. No avoiding it. That's not something we can undo." He nodded once. "I know." Claire didn't say anything. She was watching, quieter than I had ever seen her. No interruption. No attempt to steer the conversation. That was new. I looked at all three of them for a second before I spoke again. "I'm not here to argue about what happened," I said. "I'm not here to go through every detail. You already know what you did." No one disagreed. "But I need you to understand something," I continued. "I'm not the same person you sent away 5 years ago." My mom's expression tightened. "I don't need you the way I used to," I said. "I don't depend on you. I don't wait for you. I built a life without you." That landed. Not harsh, just clear. "And if you want to be part of that life now," I said, "it's not going to look like it used to." My dad took a step forward. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I decide what this looks like." I said, "Not you. Not Claire. Me." He didn't argue. That was different too. I turned to Claire. "When you're discharged, you're going to tell the truth," I said. She blinked once. "To everyone," I added. "Not just Mom and Dad. Everyone you lied to." She swallowed. "I will," she said. "And not in a conversation you can adjust or control." I continued. "In writing. One message. Clear. Direct. No edits later." She nodded. "Okay." I held her gaze for a second longer. That was the first real answer she had given me in years. Then I looked back at my parents. "You," I said, "need to figure out why this was so easy for you to believe." My dad frowned slightly. We trusted. You trusted what was convenient, I said, cutting in calmly. Not what was true. He didn't respond. Because he couldn't. You're going to go to counseling, I said. Both of them reacted to that. My dad immediately, that's exactly what this is, I said. Because this didn't start 5 years ago. This started a long time before that. Silence. My mom reached for his arm. David, she said quietly. He looked at her, then back at me, and for the first time, he didn't push back. Okay? He said. It wasn't confident. It wasn't comfortable. But it was real. That's step 1. I said. No promises. No timelines. Just a direction. I stepped back slightly. I'm not cutting you off, I added. If I wanted to do that, I would have done it already. That part mattered. They needed to hear that. But I'm not letting you back in like nothing happened either, I said. That's not how this works? My mom nodded, wiping her eyes. We'll do whatever it takes, she said. That's not what I'm asking for, I replied. I'm asking for consistency. That word stayed there. No big gestures. No emotional speeches. Just showing up the right way over time. That was the only thing that mattered now. I turned to leave. Then paused. One more thing, I said. They all looked at me. My life didn't stop when you walked away, I said. It kept going. I got married. I built a career. I created something stable. I let that sit. You weren't part of that? I added. And you don't get to rewrite that now. My dad looked down. My mom closed her eyes briefly. Claire stayed still. I opened the door. I'm not closing this completely, I said. But I'm the one who decides how it opens. Then I left. The next few weeks were quiet. Not in a dramatic way. Just steady. Claire was discharged. She followed through. Sent the message. Told the truth. No excuses. No framing. People responded how you'd expect. Some were angry. Some were confused. Most just stopped trusting her. That was enough. My parents started counseling. My mom took to it quickly. My dad didn't. But he went. That mattered more than how he felt about it. We didn't suddenly become a family again. There were no big reunions. No emotional resets. There were small things. A call once a week. Short conversations. Careful steps. Awkward at times. But real. And that was enough. Because this wasn't about going back. It was about deciding what moved forward. One morning, a few months later, they came over. First time they had ever been in my house. My mom brought food. My dad stood in the kitchen like he wasn't sure where to stand. Ethan handed him a cup of coffee without making it a moment. Thanks, he said. Simple, normal. My dad nodded. Also simple, also normal. I watched that interaction and realized something. This wasn't repair. This was rebuilding. And rebuilding is slower, more controlled, more honest. We sat down at the table. 4 plates. No tension. No performance. Just conversation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I used to want. But it was real. And real is something I understand now. Before everything happened, I thought what I needed was recognition. Then I thought it was justice. But it wasn't either of those things. What I needed was control. Control over who had access to me. Control over what I accepted. Control over where I placed my energy. That's what changed everything. I didn't get revenge. I didn't need to. I became someone who didn't require it. And that turned out to be more effective than anything I could have planned. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. The truth doesn't disappear just because people choose not to look at it. It waits. And when it shows up, it doesn't need help. It just needs space. And once it has that, everything else falls into place. Not perfectly, but honestly, and honestly is what lasts.